Hello, I'm Andie Sophia Fontaine. I'm the editor at Iceland Review, and today on Iceland News Review, we're going to be talking about Starbucks, we're going to be talking about whales, we're going to talk about fighter jets, and a lot of good stuff, so let's get into it. Before we get into anything else, we have eruption updates, as you might imagine. So for the past few weeks now, we've been anticipating another eruption in Reykjanes, southwest Iceland. And part of the way that scientists keep track of whether or not an eruption is impending is measuring seismic activity and measuring the volume of magma in the chamber beneath the earth and other factors. So most recently, they recorded about 60 earthquakes, small, tiny earthquakes in Sundhnúkagigaröð. It's a very difficult word to pronounce, which is the area where where previous eruptions had happened before, whereas the week before, and that was just over the period of 24 hours, 60 little earthquakes. The week before, they were averaging about 30 a day. So seismic activity is peaking up there a bit. Now, as a result of this, the magma accumulation and the seismic activity, they're anticipating that there's a possibility that the maximum level of magma in the chamber could be reached by as early as the end of the week, which is pretty soon. And if that happens, there's two possible scenarios that could play out. So let's take a look at those. First, there's the possibility that the eruption will go off in the area where it's happened almost every time before, which is between Skogfell and Sundhnúkur. That's the area where we've seen previous eruptions go off almost every single time. The other possibility, which is like less likely and would be a bit more serious, would be south of that area. And that would be just north of Grindavik, the town of Grindavik, which has been evacuated, or possibly even within Grindavik itself, which would be extremely serious. Fortunately, if that second scenario ends up playing out, there would be ample warning time to get pretty much everybody out of the area. The first scenario, mercifully, is the more likely one, where there isn't anybody. And in preparation for either of these events, I'd like to take you back to 1973. The island of Heimaey off the south coast of Iceland. There was a devastating eruption that happened there that completely buried the town of Heimaey on the Westman Islands in ash and lava. And one of the ways that they fought the flow of lava to protect the harbor, which is still to this day the lifeblood of the Westman Islands, is simply spraying the lava with water. That turned out to be very successful. And they've continued to use this technology during the previous eruption, when it seemed as though lava that was being held back from the earthen dam was getting dangerously close to reaching a power plant. Like the lava had actually breached the earthen dam. And so they sent fire trucks out there and they sprayed the lava with water, and once again it worked. So this time we're more prepared. We already have cooling equipment set up on the site. The government had allocated millions of kroners to setting this up, and it basically works like this. There are about 4 kilometers of hoses that run from nearby water sources, and they pull them across the general eruption area, and they're already set up in place near these earthen walls. So in the event of an eruption, they'll already be in place to help stop the flow of lava in the area. Coffee. Icelanders love their coffee. There's coffee shops you find all over this country, such as this one behind me, Cafe Molka. You will find coffee shops that range from like the larger chains, such as Tail Cafe and Coffee Tower, to smaller, more independent coffee shops. There is literally no place you can go in Iceland and not find a cup of coffee. It's even a part of like general hospitality that, if you're a guest in someone's home, if you have guests, it's considered a given that you offer them some coffee, maybe even some cake if you're lucky. So that may be why it came kind of as a surprise to people when Bjaya Foods announced that they were planning to open a Starbucks here in Iceland early next year. This news got off to a bit of a confusing start because almost immediately after this company announced that they were going to open a Starbucks in Iceland next year, an artist of sorts that goes by Oddi, he sent out a press release saying, no, this is a hoax, it's a prank. I'm behind this. I sent out this press release, and there's not going to be any Starbucks in Iceland. And this prompted some journalists to actually contact Bajaya Foods and ask, hey, are you actually opening a Starbucks here or not? And they said, yeah, we are. We don't know who this person is. So yes, there is going to be a Starbucks that they'll be opening in Iceland early next year. But who is Bajaya Food? Well, it's actually Bajaya Food International, and this is a company that has acquired the rights to open Starbucks in Iceland, Denmark, and Finland. And it's going to be interesting to see how successful Starbucks is going to be in this country. As I said, there's not a shortage of coffee in this country. You can get everything from like more commercial type coffees, such as that you might find at Starbucks, to like more like handcrafted coffees where they roast the beans themselves inside of the stores. You can already find Starbucks coffee drinks in a lot of grocery stores, like the little cold drinks, But, we'll see. Like Dunkin' Donuts also tried operating here. They were not very successful, which was very sad news for me personally. I love Dunkin' Donuts. But American chains such as Subway, have been around for a very long time, even though there are many other sub shops in Iceland too. So who's to say? Maybe Starbucks will do great. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Excuse me. So I'm walking up Skólavörðustígur. This portion of Skólavörðustígur is known as the Rainbow Street, colloquially, but not a lot of folks talk about why exactly this rainbow was painted. It was originally painted for Pride, and now it's a permanent fixture of Skólavörðustígur. And Reykjavik Pride is now going to be celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. It had begun as a march in 1999, but it can actually trace back its roots to 1993, when Icelandic gays and lesbians assembled and held a protest march to fight for their rights in this country. Today, Iceland is known as a country that has a lot of freedoms and secures a lot of queer rights. Of course, there's always room for improvement, but it is a great country for the community. Now, this particular year, being the 25th anniversary, you may be wondering exactly how well attended Reykjavik Pride is in a country of this size, because the queer community is always in the minority in any country that they're in. So how big could this celebration actually be in a country like Iceland? Well, you may be surprised to learn that Reykjavik Pride is one of the best attended festivals, in Iceland. It is almost as well attended as Independence Day celebrations. It's almost a family event. There are many different groups who come together and organize under the auspices of Pride. And it is attended by many families, many of whom don't even belong to the community, because it's considered a time for getting together and for remembering the struggles of those who came before us and the work that is yet to be done. It's for people to show their allyship with the community as well. And it's generally a good time for everybody. Now we got some political news to bring you regarding different levels of party support. Even though parliamentary elections are not until next year, polling is an ongoing thing. It's pretty much every month that Icelanders are asked, if elections were held today, who would you vote for? And it's actually a pretty good thing that they do this every month, because there have been emergency elections on several occasions in this country. And one new twist that recently came up is the Socialist Party of Iceland. Iceland does have a Socialist Party, and they don't have a single seat in Parliament. They do have a seat in Reykjavik City Council, but they've consistently polled last, usually. Like, not even polling high enough to win a seat in Parliament if elections were held. So it's still the case that they're polling too low for them to win a seat in Parliament. However, they're no longer polling last. That distinction goes to the Left Green Party, who are the party that leads the Icelandic government. The Social Democratic Alliance are once again at the top of the polls. They're at 27.6%. And just to give you an idea of how unusual that is, typically speaking, it's the Independence Party, which is Iceland's center-right party, that is almost always at the top of the polls. But they haven't been at the top of these polls for a very long time now. I think at least a year, possibly more. And they're at 17.2% right now. Meanwhile, there is they're called the Center Party, but their policies, their platform is very much right-wing. They have almost tripled in support, and they're at 14.6. They've tripled their support from the last elections in 2021. All other parties are polling in the single digits within about 1 to 2 percentage points of one another. That being the Reform Party, which is a center-right party, at 8.8%. The People's Party, again, center-right, at 8.6%. The Pirate Party, and if you're familiar with European politics in general, you probably know what the Pirate Party is about. They don't ascribe to left or right, and they're at 7.6%. And then there's the, once again, center-right Progressive Party at 7.2%. So, as I said, the Socialist Party is still not polling high enough to win a seat in Parliament. They have not cleared what's known as the 5% threshold. But they're at 4.7%, so they are pretty close. Meanwhile, the Left Greens, which is, again, the party that is leading the ruling coalition in Parliament, they're polling at 3.5%. There's a few explanations for this. They've caught a lot of criticism for partnering with the Independence Party, who have been, historically, their political enemies. And last spring, the chair of this party and the former Prime Minister, Katrín Jakobsdóttir, she resigned in order to run for president. Now, Katrín has always been a very charismatic leader and had kind of like a unifying force within the party. And with her departure, many have speculated that there wasn't really a lot holding the party's support in place. But as I said, elections are not until 2025, so we'll have to wait and see how this actually pans out for them when the elections come. NATO, the North Atlantic, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Iceland is a member country in NATO, but we have no standing military. So what does that mean? It means that we pay a lot of money into NATO, and in turn, NATO countries will send air patrols to Iceland to defend us from whatever may be threatening Iceland. Recently, it's that time again, because recently the Royal Air Force of Great Britain have announced that they'll be coming here. And in fact, they're already here. In a statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, let me just say here, there are going to be 4 F-35 fighter jets with 180 personnel coming to Iceland, and they will be here doing air surveillance patrols from August 5th to August 16th. So if you're in Iceland and you see fighter jets whizzing around, that would be why. And as I said, this is a regular occurrence. The Brits come here a lot with fighter jets, but so have the Italians, and so has Denmark and other NATO countries that regularly patrol our airspace. Now, being a NATO country, it's not like we're under any sort of immediate threat from other people, but still, we've paid dues into the organization, and so this is what we get in return. And actually, Iceland being in NATO has been a controversial subject since the late 1940s, when Iceland joined the organization. This is in large part because Iceland joining NATO was not something that was put up to a public referendum, what have you. It was a few people in parliament who made this decision, and there were a lot of objections to this, particularly from leftists in Iceland who had organized in front of parliament, and there were protests that erupted into violence, actually. But now we just kind of take it as a given that we're in NATO, although there are a lot of Icelanders that believe we should withdraw from the organization. Lastly, on Iceland News Review, I have a rather heartwarming story involving whales. So whales, as you are probably aware, do beach themselves on occasion. And one such whale beached itself in Thorlaxhöp, which is a little village in South Iceland, yesterday. At first, people thought this was a minke whale, which is one of the whales that we hunt in this country, but on closer examination, they determined that it was a baleen whale calf. And upon this whale washing up on shore, rescue workers and police immediately sprang into action. They kept the whale wet by draping it with wet sheets, and eventually a boat arrived in the harbor and dragged the whale back into sea where it swam to freedom, which is really nice. Interesting fun fact, you know the English word windfall, right? And this is derived from when serfs on the manor of a lord who weren't allowed to cut down their own trees for firewood, if a storm would come through and knock down a tree, they would have a windfall, wood that they could actually use for firewood. It's a stroke of luck provided to you by nature. In Icelandic, the word for this phenomenon is hvalreki, which is beached whale, because in olden times, if you're very poor and food is scarce, you wake up one morning and there's a giant whale just sitting right there on the beach. You've got enough meat to feed an entire village. So times have changed, fortunately. Whales are still eaten, but by a very, very small minority of Icelanders, I should emphasize. Like most of the minke whale meat that is consumed in Iceland is consumed primarily by tourists who visit restaurants that are serving it. You can see them doing some restoration work on Hallgrímskirkju here, in particular the exterior, because like a lot of churches in Iceland, Hallgrímskirkju sits on the highest elevated point, facing north, as per tradition, and so it gets a lot of wind. And because Reykjavik is a harbor town, it's a lot of wind with salt in it, and that will have a corrosive effect on this building. So that's why these renovations are taking place. The outer part of the church needs to be regularly renovated in order to keep it in good condition. So we've arrived at last at Tjörnin, and this is the center for queer youth in Iceland, not just in Reykjavik. This progress flag was painted here yesterday, and now this is based in Reykjavik, but this is a queer center that is open to queer youth all over the country. And in fact, it's estimated that some 40% of young people who come here are from outside of Reykjavik. It's a place for queer youth to hang out, make friends with one another, feel less isolated and alone. It is genuinely a good thing. And that's why it's a very good thing that this place is here, and it looks really pretty having this rainbow all set up here. That's all I have for you today here in Iceland News Review. I'm Andie Sophia Fontaine. I will see you again next week. Be good to each other.